So my best friend of 20 years left me stranded 4 hours from home and it cost me $800 to get back. Now she thinks I'm the villain because I sent her a Venmo request for the money. And honestly, a month later, I still go back and forth on whether I was justified or whether I finally said the one thing I should have kept to myself. Because the truth is, this wasn't just one fight. This was 20 years of weird jealousy, passive-aggressive comments, unspoken competition, and one very specific man sitting right in the middle of it all. And it all finally exploded at his wedding. So yeah, here's what happened. I'm 31, and my friend Becky is also 31. We've been best friends since high school. Not casual friends. Not we text once every few months. Friends. I mean real best friends. The kind of friendship where your families know each other, where you have inside jokes from when you were 15, where people just assume you'll always be in each other's lives because you've already been through every version of growing up together. Back in high school, Becky and I became really close with two guys, Ryan and Daniel. And for a long time, it felt like the four of us did everything together. We had that kind of friendship that feels bigger when you're young. Like the sort of thing you assume will somehow survive everything. Friday night food runs. Random road trips. Birthdays, breakups, graduations. Long stupid conversations that felt deeply important at the time. For years, it was always the four of us. And if you had asked me back then, I would have said Becky was one of the most important people in my life. Which is probably why I ignored the red flags for as long as I did. Because once someone becomes part of your identity, it's weirdly hard to admit when the relationship has started to rot. The biggest red flag, the one that had basically existed forever, was Becky's thing with Ryan. And when I say thing, I don't mean some normal little crush that faded with age. I mean fixation. Becky has always been weird about Ryan. For as long as I can remember. If Ryan liked a girl, Becky immediately had a problem with her. Not always in a dramatic, obvious way. Sometimes it was subtle. She'd make little comments. She'd question the girl's personality. She'd act like the girl was annoying, shallow, fake, controlling, boring, not smart enough, not funny enough, somehow not right for him. And it was never framed as jealousy. It was always framed like concern. Like she was just being honest. Like she just knew Ryan better than everyone else and was protecting him from women who didn't deserve him. But after enough years, the pattern got impossible to miss. If Ryan showed interest in someone, Becky would find a way to make that girl feel unwelcome. And if the relationship became serious, Becky's attitude usually got worse. At first, when we were younger, I think everyone kind of brushed it off. Because high school is messy. Teenage friendships are messy. Everything feels dramatic when you're 16. But the thing is, it never really stopped. We all got older. Ryan dated. We grew up. Our lives changed. But Becky never really changed when it came to him. She still talked about him differently than she talked about Daniel. She still watched his relationships too closely. She still seemed to think she had some emotional claim to him that nobody else was supposed to challenge. And I think a part of me always knew what it was. I just never said it out loud. Because saying something out loud makes it real. And if it becomes real, then suddenly you have to do something about it. At some point, the weirdness stopped being aimed only at Ryan's girlfriends and started being aimed at me too. And that was when it became harder to dismiss. Because I wasn't dating Ryan. I had never dated Ryan. There was never anything remotely like that between us. He was just one of my closest friends for most of my life. That was it. But Becky started making little comments that felt competitive. Like she needed to establish that she mattered more to him than I did. And not in a jokey way. Not in that normal friend group teasing way where everyone knows no one actually means it. It felt sharper than that. Like she genuinely needed reassurance that her place with Ryan was above mine. She'd make comments downplaying my friendship with him. Or she'd compare things. Or she'd phrase stuff in a way that made it sound like I was somehow less significant. And the part that made it so uncomfortable was that there was no reason for it. I wasn't competing with her. I didn't want to compete with her. It felt like she had invented a contest and then kept trying to win it in front of me while I was just standing there wondering why there even had to be a winner. But I ignored it. For years, partly because I hate confrontation. Partly because when someone has been in your life that long, you get used to translating their behavior into something more harmless than it really is. You tell yourself maybe she's insecure. Maybe she didn't mean it like that. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe this is just one of those old friendship dynamics that's annoying but survivable. And honestly, I think I also ignored it because I wanted to believe 20 years meant something. I wanted to believe that history mattered. That if someone has loved you for that long, maybe they deserve the benefit of the doubt a few more times than other people do. But sometimes history doesn't make a relationship healthier. Sometimes it just makes a bad pattern last longer. Fast forward to last month. Ryan got married. And obviously, this was a huge deal. Not just because it was a wedding, but because Ryan had been part of our lives for so long that this felt like one of those major milestones where everyone kind of looks around and realizes how much time has passed. Becky and I drove there together and shared a hotel room. Which, in retrospect, was maybe my first mistake. The drive itself wasn't terrible at first. It had that normal pre-event energy. We were talking about what we were wearing, who might be there, how crazy it was that Ryan was getting married, the usual stuff. But pretty quickly, Becky started making comments. Small ones at first. The kind of comments that are hard to confront because each one, by itself, sounds almost harmless. But when you stack enough of them together, they start to feel deliberate. She kept saying weird things about how she was really the reason she was so connected to Ryan. And then at one point, she flat out said I probably wouldn't even be at the wedding if it weren't for her. And she didn't just say it privately to me. She said versions of that in front of other people too. That was the part that really got under my skin. Because now it wasn't just passive-aggressive. Now it was embarrassing. And it had that ugly social undercurrent where someone says something mean in a smiling tone, so if you react, you look dramatic. You know that kind of comment? The kind where everyone can feel something weird just happened. But there's enough plausible deniability that the person saying it gets to act innocent? That was what she was doing. And the whole time, I kept trying to just stay calm. I told myself this was Ryan's wedding. I told myself I was not going to get dragged into some bizarre old jealousy spiral during someone else's big day, so I let things slide. Again. And again. And again. Which, in hindsight, might have been my second mistake. Because when you keep swallowing irritation to keep the peace, you're not actually making the tension disappear. You're just storing it. And stored tension always comes due eventually. After the wedding events, back at the hotel, things got worse. It was one of those late-night conversations that probably should have never happened. Everyone's tired. Emotions are weird. The event is over, but the emotional charge is still in the air. And Becky started complaining that Ryan hadn't spent enough time with her. That alone was already kind of wild to say, considering he had just gotten married. But then she said something that made the entire room emotionally stop. She said, and I'm paraphrasing, but not by much, sorry to you and Daniel, but he should at least want to spend time with me. And I remember just staring at her. Because what do you even say to that? Even if you've suspected something for years, there's still something surreal about hearing a person say the quiet part almost out loud. Like this is his wedding. His wedding. Not a reunion centered around your feelings. Not some event where your emotional access to him is supposed to be prioritized. Not a moment where the bride, the guests, and the actual reality of the day all fade into the background because Becky wants proof that she still matters in some special way. And after years of hearing versions of this, years of the comments, the competition, the weird possessiveness, something in me just snapped. Not in a screaming way. Not in a dramatic, theatrical way. Actually, I said it kind of flatly. I looked at her and said, what a weird thing to say out loud. And honestly, I still think that was one of the mildest true things I could have said. Because it was weird. Deeply weird. And for 1 second, I think she was shocked that I said anything at all. Because that was the pattern, right? She says something inappropriate. Everyone awkwardly moves on. No one names it. She gets to keep living inside the fiction that she isn't being obvious. But this time, I named it. And once I did, everything escalated immediately. The second I said that, Becky got defensive. Fast. Her tone changed instantly. And then she hit me with, oh. What? You really think Ryan and I aren't better friends? Which told me everything I needed to know. Because notice what she didn't say. She didn't say, that's not what I meant. She didn't say, you're misunderstanding me. She didn't say, I'm just emotional. No. She went straight to ranking. Straight to hierarchy. Straight to proving that she was more important. And then she brought up the engagement ring. Apparently, Ryan had asked her to help design it. And she threw that out like it was evidence in some trial I didn't even know I was participating in. Like that proved she had a deeper claim. Like that won her the argument. And at that point, I was just done. Completely done. Because I wasn't even arguing that I was closer to him. That wasn't my point. That had never been my point. So I said, I don't care who's closer. It's weird that you care this much. And then I said the line that has been replaying in my head ever since. It's not our fault you're in love with him. And yeah. That was harsh. I know it was harsh. It was the kind of sentence that only comes out when you've been swallowing the same truth for years and finally lose the patience to package it politely. The second it left my mouth, I knew there was no taking it back. Because even if I felt it was true, saying it out loud changed the entire dynamic permanently. And Becky absolutely lost it. She stormed out. And for a moment, I thought she just needed air. I thought maybe she'd cool off and come back. But she didn't. Because instead of coming back she left. She got in the car and drove off. Without me. And this is the part that makes me feel insane when I replay it. Because no matter how ugly the fight was, no matter what I said, no matter how offended she felt we were there together. We had driven there together. We were staying together. And she knew I had no easy way to get back on my own. She left me stranded 4 hours from home. And if you've never been in that situation, let me explain how fast it goes from, "This is unbelievable," to, "Oh my God, this is actually a logistical disaster." At first, that hot, shaky kind of anger where you can't even fully process what's happened yet because your brain is still expecting the person to come back. You keep thinking, "No, surely not. Surely she's just circling around. Surely she's trying to scare me. Surely she's not actually going to leave me here." But then minutes pass. Then more minutes. Then your anger starts mixing with panic. Because now this isn't just an argument. Now it's transportation. Money? Safety? Timing. How do I get home? What's open? What do I even do first? And the more I thought about it, the more surreal it felt. This was someone I had known for 20 years. 20 years. Not 20 weeks. Not some flaky acquaintance I'd met through work. Not someone who barely knew me. My best friend of 2 decades had just made sure I understood exactly how disposable I was to her the second I stopped playing along with her version of reality. And honestly, that hurt more than the practical inconvenience. The money sucked. The being stranded sucked. But the emotional part was worse. Because it forced me to look at our friendship in a way I'd been avoiding for a very long time. People can say a lot of cruel things in the heat of a fight, but leaving someone stranded far from home is a decision. That takes follow-through. That takes commitment. That's not an accident. That's not tone. That's not miscommunication. That is a choice. And she made it. The next morning, I started trying to figure out how to get back. And this was where the situation went from awful to expensive. I couldn't rent a car because I only had a debit card, which, apparently, made things way more complicated than I expected. So suddenly one of the easiest backup plans was gone. And once that option disappeared, I basically had one realistic choice left. A same-day flight. Across the country. For $800. $800. And I just sat there looking at that number feeling this mix of disbelief, humiliation, rage, and exhaustion. Because it's not just the money itself, it's the principle. It's the fact that I was being forced to spend $800 because my supposed best friend couldn't handle hearing the truth. Or at least couldn't handle hearing what I thought was the truth. And yes, I know, someone will always say, "Well, you shouldn't have said it." Okay. Maybe, but most adults, even after a nasty fight, do not abandon their travel companion and create an $800 emergency for them. That is not a proportionate response. That is not normal conflict. That is scorched earth behavior. So I booked the flight. Because what else was I supposed to do? And I spent the whole day feeling angry enough to shake. Not just at her. At myself too. At myself for ignoring this dynamic so long. At myself for getting in that car with her in the first place. At myself for still being surprised. Because when you look back at toxic behavior with hindsight, there's always this awful second layer where you realize your intuition had been trying to warn you for years. And you kept talking yourself out of listening. After that, I sent her an angry text. And no, it was probably not my finest moment. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I responded with perfect calm, emotional maturity, and polished language. I didn't. I was furious. I was stranded. I had just been forced to spend $800. I felt betrayed, embarrassed, and honestly kind of stupid for still calling her my best friend after everything. So yes, the text was angry. And then I sent her a Venmo request for the $800. Because from my perspective, why shouldn't I? She created the situation. She made the decision that caused the expense. If she had not abandoned me, I would not have had to spend that money. It felt extremely simple to me in that moment. You cause the cost. You pay the cost. She never responded. Not to the text. Not to the Venmo request. And we haven't spoken in a month. Which, honestly, feels both shocking and not shocking at all. Because on one hand, a month of silence after 20 years of friendship is huge. That's not a small bump in the road. That's not, we just need a few days to cool off. That's relationship, ending silence. But on the other hand, if I'm being brutally honest, I think some part of me knew that once this finally blew up, there was no version of it that would go back to normal. Because what exactly would normal even be after this? Me going back to pretending her fixation on Ryan wasn't obvious? Her going back to making little cutting comments while I smiled through them? Both of us acting like she didn't leave me stranded because I said something she didn't want to hear? No. There's no real normal after that. There's only avoidance. And maybe that's what we'd been doing all along. Now, to be fair to her, I know the line about her being in love with him was brutal. And maybe it was too far. Maybe it was one of those truths that you don't get to weaponize just because you're tired of someone's behavior. I've thought about that a lot. Because there is a difference between being right and being kind. And there's also a difference between observing a pattern and throwing it in someone's face during a fight. If I'm being really honest, I think I said it because I wanted to wound her. Not just because I wanted to make a point. I wanted the conversation to stop. I wanted to puncture the delusion. I wanted her to finally feel how exhausting and uncomfortable her behavior had been for everyone else. And I got my wish. Just not in a way that fixed anything. So yeah, I do carry guilt about that. I know that sentence was harsh. I know my angry text afterward probably wasn't graceful. And I know sending a Venmo request immediately after all of that probably guaranteed there was no soft landing. But here's the part I keep coming back to. Even if I was harsh, even if I was mean, even if I crossed a line, she still left me there. That's the part I can't get past. Because words can be cruel, yes, but actions reveal character in a different way. And leaving someone stranded isn't just lashing out. It's deliberate. It's punitive. It says, I want you to suffer for what you said. And that's what makes it hard for me to feel like the Venmo request was unreasonable. Petty? Maybe. Aggressive? Definitely. But unreasonable? I don't know. I really don't. The more distance I've had from it, the more I think this wasn't actually just about one comment at a wedding. It was about a long pattern finally reaching the point where it couldn't be disguised anymore. Because Becky didn't leave me over one sentence. Not really. She left because I broke the agreement. The unspoken agreement. The one where she gets to behave badly, and everyone else quietly edits reality around her to keep things functional. The one where she gets to obsess over Ryan, compete with women around him, compare herself to everyone, and make passive-aggressive comments and no one says the obvious thing. The second I said the obvious thing, I stopped being useful to the dynamic. I stopped being the friend who absorbs the weirdness and smooths it over. And I think that's why her reaction was so extreme. Because for years, I helped protect her from the consequences of being fully seen. And then, suddenly, I didn't. And maybe she hated me for that more than for the actual words. Honestly, this entire situation has made me rethink a lot about long-term friendships. Because people talk about romantic relationships ending when the mask slips. But friendships can be even trickier. Especially the old ones. The ones with history. The ones built on nostalgia. The ones you keep preserving because they've existed so long that ending them feels like cutting off part of your own life story. But history is not the same thing as health. And loyalty is not the same thing as silence. Sometimes being someone's longtime friend just means you had a front row seat to the same dysfunction for years. We're supposed to talk tomorrow. And I honestly don't know what that conversation is supposed to look like. Part of me wants an apology. A real one. Not some fake halfway apology where she says, I'm sorry you felt stranded, or, I'm sorry things got so heated. No. I want acknowledgement that what she did was insane. That leaving me 4 hours away without transportation was unacceptable. That the $800 wasn't some random unrelated inconvenience. That it happened because of her decision. But another part of me suspects she's going to make the whole conversation about what I said. And look, I get it. What I said was ugly. It was. But I can already feel the shape of the argument forming, and it makes me tired. Because I know how these things go. Person A does something objectively outrageous. Person B finally says something cruel in response. And suddenly all the focus shifts to the cruel sentence, because it's easier to discuss tone than patterns. It's easier to debate whether I was too harsh than to explain why a 31-year-old woman is still acting territorially over her married friend on his wedding day. And I think that's what I'm bracing for. The possibility that tomorrow won't actually be about accountability. It'll be about narrative control. About whether she can reframe herself as the wounded one and me as the aggressor. And maybe I deserve some of that. But not all of it. Definitely not all of it. So that's where I'm at. I know saying she was in love with him was harsh. I know my text afterward wasn't my best moment. And maybe sending the Venmo request was emotionally charged, maybe even petty. But she left me stranded 4 hours from home. I had no rental option. My only realistic way back was a same-day $800 flight. And the friendship hasn't survived the silence since. So now I'm sitting here, one day before we finally talk, trying to decide whether I was justified or whether I crossed a line so hard that none of what she did after even matters. Did I owe her more compassion after 20 years of friendship? Or was charging her the $800 the only reasonable response to someone who abandoned me the second I stopped indulging her? Ada?